For about 18 months, the CBS 2 investigative team has been looking at search warrants and raids at homes that were incorrect or had bad information. And we've interviewed children and family members who have suffered traumas, had either guns pointed at them and maybe even handcuffed. So it's been an 18-month sort of journey for us, and we've met a lot of different human beings. There's a sense of humanity to this, and it's quite sad too when you interview the children. My first question is, did either of you see any of this? Did either of you see any of the series, and if so, what was your reaction?
I did not see it.
So you haven't seen any of the body camera footage or the stories that we've done?
I've heard about them, but no, I've not seen them.
Okay. How about you, Lieutenant?
I've seen some of the footage, and yes, it was, the way it was presented, it was, shocking, and you feel for some of these, not some of them, you feel for these kids in this position, and but with that being said, I didn't really have the opportunity to find out all the details regarding it.
But you're aware of that there's numerous cases.
Correct.
Have you ever seen anything like this in your tenure here, where we'd had this many cases of alleged wrong raids surface?
I've never, as part of my role, I've never really been in a position where I was to track these type of situations. So in the places that I've worked, I have not seen a lot of these negative raids. But
in your experience on the force, just seeing what's been happening lately, have you ever seen a time where there were this many cases of wrong raids?
And when we mean by wrong raids, it has, obviously, if the search warrant's for a particular address and they hit the wrong address, we definitely think that's, the wrong raid, and that should not happen. And there is training, and it's something we always bring up, and there's safeguards in the training that officers should be following. But there's also, people call wrong raids or negative raids when the target of the search warrant, you go in there and they don't make a positive recovery of, say, narcotics or the gun, but yet there is evidence that there's baggies and scales and cut, so that sometimes the timing is wrong, and it's not necessarily a wrong raid, it's just bad timing for a positive recovery.
There's a lot of noise coming from a lot of different places. There's speakers. It's not just you, Maggie. Somebody's on a loud. I guess that's something. Oh. You keep hearing it over his voice because I think it was the announcement that they had the parking in front of this high school. So maybe that's over. Well, what led you to change the policy? So
CPD, as you know, is going under a lot of reform efforts right now, and risk management was part of the 2020 strategic plan for the CPD, in addition to the mayor's office hiring a chief risk officer. So collaboratively, we got together. We started looking at a lot of the things that are high risk for the department. An entire list of things from an entire team that we looked through, and search warrants just happened to be one of them. And once we saw that, we decided to get a team together, an interdisciplinary team, subject matter experts like Lieutenant Cline, who actually deal with search warrant execution, our legal staff from both here and at the Department of Law, the chief risk officer, me, our policy team, our training academy, and we looked at the entire process of search warrant execution and tried to see where some of our pitfalls were, what we were doing good, and where we needed to make areas of improvement.
Well, you said that the search warrants just happened to be, you said it just happened to be one of the areas, search warrants happened to be one of the areas you looked at. Did the investigation that we did that cause or prompt any of this?
What prompted this, I would say that's probably more coincidence than anything. We, in meeting with the Department of Law and our people here, we looked at areas where we were having high settlements or a lot of litigation, or where the various teams saw that there might be some risk, and then we prioritized them, and search warrants was something that we saw that we might be able to make some quick changes, and that it jumped to the top of the list.
So the policy changes are, for the first time, there's a mention of children in the search warrant policy.
Correct.
Why?
Because there have been instances, certainly with the litigation, where we've noticed that there have been a traumatic impact on children. Let's be clear, no child should have a gun pointed in his face. That's not our goal when we're executing a search warrant. And so we wanted to make clear that our officers were aware of how to deal with these sensitive situations when they encounter them. And by getting that in the policy, and also making sure that we're contacting DCFS when we notice things like exposed weapons or drugs in the place, that something is being done to make sure the children are taken care of both physically and mentally. But also, we want to make sure in our training that we were getting this across to our officers that this was an important area, that they needed to make sure that they're considering children and other sensitive populations when they're doing search warrants.
So how are you rolling that out? How are they going to be trained to deal with the children?
So we've revamped the training. I'll let Lieutenant Cline talk about it, since he's the one doing the actual training and how that.
Okay. So Lieutenant Cline, how are you going to deal with children? How are officers going to handle children now when they end up on a search warrant where the home is filled with young kids?
We don't think it's ever been a systemic problem with the Chicago Police Department. There has been definitely some isolated incidents, and one incident is too many involving kids in a negative fashion. But I think people have to also understand that these search warrants are very dynamic. The officers need to think about officer safety. They need to think about the public safety. They need to think about the safety of all the individuals inside that search warrant, as well as safeguarding the emotional and physical safety of those kids. So we're also highlighting to the officers that obviously what's most important is everybody's safety, and making that dynamic entry in a search warrant, that first minute to 2 minutes until we can kind of clear the search warrant is the term we use, that all the officers can make entry and clear to make sure that everything is safe, and to detain individuals, and to ensure that there's no guns being used against the officers. So during that time, it can be a scary situation, but we also want to make sure the officers are taking special notice of the children. And
special notice?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Observing, and during our operational planning before we hit a search warrant, we're making sure that if we know children to be present, that in our operational planning that it's discussed that there's going to be children in here, and to have officers with that mindset to be careful when going in. But the officers, the initial part is to ensure that everybody's safe going in.
But we found cases where there was little or no surveillance done prior to the raid, maybe a drive-by, and no one knew that there were children in the place. They weren't prepared for children. So, when you talk about the pre-game, plan, or the pre-raid plan, how is there going to be a discussion now in the pre-raid plan about, are there going to be children in this home?
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about. During an operational plan, whoever we think is going to be inside that residence, we should have a plan for those individuals. If there's going to be elderly people, if there's going to be females, if there's going to be children there, what is the plan? The plan, we should have a comprehensive plan before we make entry to deal with anything that might be known before we enter.
What good is the plan? What good is the plan if the officer, the affiant who's getting the warrant hasn't independently verified, double-checked and triple-checked the informant's information to make sure you're actually going into the right apartment or the right home?
We do between 1,500 and 2,000 search warrants a year, and I think in most of these cases the officers do a very good independent investigation. And are there some that are not being done to the standards that we have? Absolutely. And and that's being addressed. It's been addressed in the past, but now we're definitely seeing a need that we need to reinforce that this investigation is conducted in a thorough manner to protect the officers and all the individuals that are going to be inside that search warrant.
But do you see what I'm saying about, you can plan for children if you think there's children there, but if you're in the wrong place, you don't know who's going to be in there.
And certainly instances where someone enters an address that's not on the search warrant, or that should never happen. And we absolutely are making efforts now to ensure a standard process through every district. Every bureau of the Chicago Police Department is following a plan before executing a search warrant. While these procedures were in place, like the lieutenant said, we do 1,500 to 2,000 search warrants a year, and most of them are doing a great job at them. But we didn't have a documented standard process. We're now making sure that you have to have this operational plan in pre-execution. You have to go through all the checks. You need to do your drive-bys and make sure everyone on the team knows exactly what building you're going to, who you're looking for. And these are now documented procedures, and it's going to be stressed in training. So our hope is that with all these checks in place, that the wrong address situation won't happen. However, if it does happen, now we're going to be entering a log number. That person will be referred for discipline and any of the other elements that might come from that. So we're going to make sure that officers are held accountable if that indeed would occur now.
Well, you said now there'll be documentation of the procedures and
standardizing of the procedures.
So there's going to be more. There's going to be documentation now. But wasn't there already a required documentation when you independently verify an informant's
There's always been
information?
documentation. We've always had. We're trying to shore up our standard operating procedures for executing a search warrant. So the operational plan that the lieutenant discussed was not part of the policy before. Now that they're being trained on it, that is something that we're making sure is going to happen throughout the districts, throughout every bureau. Anybody engaging in search warrant activity for the Chicago Police Department will follow the same procedures.
One search warrant was for a man who was the target. The target was in prison, and the search warrant said he'd been selling heroin out of this apartment for 2 months, but he'd been in prison already for years, and they hit a house. How does that happen?
And based on what you're telling me, that shouldn't happen. Officers should conduct a thorough investigation, and there are databases and ways that they should be able to discover that. And that is something that we do stress in our training, that it's something that we need to ensure that we're doing, and supervisors are going to follow up to ensure that these measures have been taken.
Isn't that on the list? Like, one of the things on the list is to make sure that the target's not already in police custody or locked up already?
Yes, that's what we've made sure that's part of the formalized training that is on there.
Some of the officers in the cases we've been reviewing have said in depositions that they didn't have, the affiants have said they didn't have access to Accurant to do the database checks. It said sergeants and above had access. Are all these officers getting access to the best public record checking databases available for police?
Yes, and I think in these specific cases, this was a problem where access was available to them through calling CPIC, but some of them, things fell through the cracks and they didn't realize that that was the proper way to obtain this information. And we're making sure that everybody that participates in search warrants is going to get this information and knows what resources are available and what are the best practices.
There's no question police officers have a difficult job. I would not want to be the one having to go in that door. And I'm sure nobody wants to make a mistake. How critical is it to do that due diligence to make sure it's absolutely correct?
It's essential. Not only for the officer's safety, but for the safety of everybody involved in that search warrant. And it is something that we train. It is something that is dictated in best practices, and now it's something that's dictated in the policy.
Are you going to be tracking wrong raids? I don't see anything in the new policy. I haven't heard anything. But is someone going to be taking and making a database now? Are you tracking? Have you started tracking wrong raids?
The policy actually does indicate that a log number will be entered if if the search team enters the wrong address. So
yeah, I read that, and it says if they enter the wrong address, but it's not really clear on the kinds of cases we've been talking about where the informant gave them an address and the address was right on the warrant, but it was the wrong information. It should have been maybe the upstairs apartment. Like the warrant was right. It wasn't like a typographical, they didn't like put 2B when it should have been 3B. They were going into 2B or whatever, but they should have gone to the third floor. You know what I mean? That's a little bit different, I think, than you turn left instead of turning right. Are you going to be tracking cases that when you find them, and you find out it's a negative, you call it a negative warrant? Or are they different? Is that a different thing, a negative warrant and a wrong raid? Are they?
I would say so. They're different.
They're different.
A negative search warrant can mean that everything was right on the search warrant. They just did not find what they were looking for. Okay,
and then a wrong raid is something this for the first time now you're going to have a log. Is that what you're saying?
There will be a log number generated when the officer or the search team enters the wrong address, yes.
So Dave, by a log, that means it's a complaint to initiate an investigation by our internal affairs. So these will be investigated.
Has anything else changed in the way a search warrant has to be signed off now? As the way I understood it, it was affiant had to get approval from a lieutenant or above. Is that the same process still?
So initially, affiant will have work with a supervisor who will initially review it, and then they'll present it to their lieutenant. The lieutenant will then review it, and then from there, the affiant will present the search warrant to an assistant state's attorney on a state-level search warrant, and then that state's attorney will then review it, and then from there, the officer will present that search warrant to a judge.
How do you prevent? When you and I've seen some of the body camera footage, and I see the door gets knocked in, and then the other officers. There's usually somebody, maybe sometimes with a shield, maybe someone's got an assault rifle. How do you prevent that officer with the assault rifle from pointing it at a child when they first go into a building?
Well, we're trying to stress that officers keep that at a low ready position and not point, because as you indicated yourself, it is an inherently dangerous situation. Since my time in organized crime, one of my fellow officers has been killed, and there's 4 others that have been shot, executing this. So we do need to take the utmost caution and protect ourselves. And that's just the people that worked with me throughout the city. There's many, many more who've been shot. And so
how do you balance that?
That's the difficulty, Dave. Once again, we have to balance the fact of officer safety, the safety of those people involved, the public safety of those around, and trying to be concerned with children in there. And it's a dynamic entry. This is all happening within usually within 90 seconds. Entering and securing that residence. So it is very quick, and it's very dangerous, and it's a very tough balancing act. And the police officers going in there, we're human beings too, and people are scared and people are nervous, knowing that sometimes that the individual on the other side of the door is supposed to be somebody who's known to shoot people, somebody who's known to be a dangerous individual. Your information could be that this individual has shot other people. So it is, with all that going on, we do try to have a good plan, but in the heat of those situations, will sometimes a gun be, pointed in a dynamic situation? It's possible. We're not going to say that will never happen. It's our goal for it not to happen, but it's a dynamic situation.
I'm just waiting to see if this announcement happens. What? Can't do anything till he's done. Yeah, I'm just waiting it out. Okay.
Is he going to be at that level this whole time? Or is the level going to go down? Only because...
Okay, here, we'll just... We're looking at a case right now. We have body camera footage. Police go in. There's just 3 little kids home. Assault rifle pointed at them directly, not low ready, right at, put on the ground, get down, and then they're taken into another room and they're interrogated with no parent presence. 14-year-old, 11-year-old, 7-year-old. This is caught on body camera. I don't know, and I'm just telling you that that's one of the things we're looking into now. Body cameras. We found numerous cases where body cameras. It's just so loud.
Yeah, there's no, they were speaking before, never heard this loud. Is there anything with us or no? I mean, I'm not trying to cut him off. I'm just wondering if there's an adjustment that could be made.
Is Tim in there?
It's like a bingo hall.
Do you need a break?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Get some water? The first one. Walls are thin in here. Holy cow.
No, I think that's.
No.
Yeah.
It's nothing.
Huh? What is he doing in there? Is he
Sorry, they're using that conference room.
There's a speech, I think a former police chief from the Parkland shootings when that happened.
Appreciate that. Okay, sorry. It's just so loud.
Way to go, Maggie. Way to set up the room. Thanks a lot.
Remember when you went 18 months ago?
That's a little bit better. No.
Can I get up, stretch your legs?
I'm good.
I'm good.
So, and I'm a Michelle with one L too.
Oh,
We are
we're
a rare
special
breed.
people.
So my first thing, and then
Yeah,
I'll send you something.
I can't really even read without my glass. I mean,
Oh my goodness.
okay. Okay. Yeah.
Should have brought your glasses.
They're down there, but I.
Oh.
Okay.
We're the
I've seen
pesky
that.
producers who have our own questions.
All right, let's try it. I'm going to get back to that question though, but you guys rolling? Okay, body worn cameras. Numerous cases we've investigated now show officers either didn't turn on their body worn cameras or didn't put them on when they, officers that actually had body worn cameras issued to them either didn't put them on or turn them on in raids. Could that happen? What should be happening with the body worn cameras when they go into a home?
What should be happening, and it certainly is addressed in this new policy, is one, if you have been assigned a body-worn camera, you are to follow body-worn camera procedures, which would mean turning it on. But to also counteract, we understand that not all officers have been assigned body-worn cameras, so now, per policy, 2 uniformed officers, preferably from patrol, who should have body-worn cameras, should be on the entry team and going into the search warrant.
So that's new. Now you're going to have at least 2 uniform officers on the entry team going in if it's a unit that doesn't have body-worn cameras.
It should be 2 uniformed officers either way, that's period.
Well, usually sometimes they're on the perimeter, but now they're going to be going in. They're going to be part of the entry team.
Yes.
Okay. Why not just give body-worn cameras to the drug unit and the gang unit? And why aren't all those other units, SWAT and the specialized units, why aren't they all just wearing body-worn cameras?
I'm sure that would be lovely. I mean, it costs money. Obviously, I think the plan at some point is to get body-worn cameras for the units that require that or that need them. I mean, there are some special considerations with our covert units and narcotics, undercover officers, et cetera.
But certainly they could wear them on the raid.
Certainly, and that's the plan. I mean, that's certainly why, understanding our issues in that we don't have enough body-worn cameras currently for everyone is why we changed the policy to make sure that 2 uniformed officers will be on every search warrant.
Is the city planning to purchase more body cameras so they can equip the other officers with them?
That we would have to talk to the city about. I can't answer that.
Do you believe there will be a time when SWAT will be wearing body cameras on search warrants and raids?
Again, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. How important is that body-worn camera?
I think it is important to gather evidence and to show the scene as it happened at that time. So I do think it's a valuable tool for us.
When are they supposed to turn them off? At what point in the raid are they supposed to turn them off?
When they leave the search warrant. And I think this is, for body cameras, for some people, is still new, and I think there's a training issue, and it is being addressed in the new training. In the new order, it states to keep the body cameras on probably at least 3 times in the new order. So it is something that in retraining the officers that we're really trying to hammer home that the body cameras it's not a discretionary thing in a search warrant, it must be on the entire time.
Has anyone ever been disciplined for not wearing their body-worn camera on a search warrant and raid?
I don't have that knowledge.
Do you know?
I don't.
To date, we don't know of anyone that's ever been disciplined for not wearing their body-worn camera on a raid. And do you know of anybody?
I don't have the data.
Okay. As far as, there was a raid that we did a lot of coverage on, and that was the Mendez case. Police can be heard saying, we're in the wrong apartment, we're in the wrong effing apartment. He said upstairs, he said 3rd floor, and then they continue to search. Should they continue to search after they know they're in the wrong apartment?
Absolutely not.
So what moment, they try to say, well, we were just doing a surface search, we weren't throwing things around, we were just kind of like opening drawers and things like that. That's still a search, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So the moment you know you're in the wrong place, you have to leave.
Correct, and that's being addressed in the training, and we talk about that specifically, that once you realize, you immediately retreat out of the residence and notify supervisors. Now, a supervisor in a search warrant's already going to be there, but immediately, and then we're going to get that log number, you're going to start that IAD investigation, but immediately, and I hammered home in the training that, you're not going to make a bad search good by continuing to search and thinking you're going to find some contraband. So we're letting guys know, and we're hammering that point through, that once you find out you're in the wrong place, you need to exit immediately.
What is so there's one thing that I was confused on that you guys said earlier about when we talked about verifying addresses. When an officer fails to verify, the correct address, so when an officer gets an affiant gets a warrant and it's the wrong place, it's bad information, they failed to verify it was the right information, and they end up in the wrong home. Clearly the wrong home, not like a negative warrant, but when they end up raiding the wrong home, is there going to be discipline in this new policy?
If they're raiding the wrong home, it would depend. I mean, each circumstance will have to be reviewed individually. Obviously, per policy, all of this information should be vetted through an entire team, not just this one affiant. So somewhere the CI should be, or John Doe, or however their informant was, the search team, this entry team, the supervisor, all of that, there will be some breakdown, and in an investigation of this, if discipline is necessary, that a CR should be filed, then yes, it should be filed.
But are those types of raids going to be entered into that log?
Specifically, no, not that.
Why not? They're the wrong. If they're wrong, why wouldn't they be entered in that log?
That would require more thorough investigation, because you need to find out where the breakdown was there, because it could be anything.
So now what you're only really tracking then is when you go into the wrong apartment by mistake, not when you've actually gotten a warrant for the wrong apartment.
As far as the log number in the policy, correct?
Why wouldn't you want to create a log number for the ones that you got wrong?
It would be impossible for a team immediately following a search warrant to know exactly where the breakdown was. That would require further investigation the log number is generated immediately. Search is over. We know we hit the wrong place. A log number is generated. The scenario that you're speaking of will require a more thorough investigation than that.
Are you creating any kind of a database for that, for those types of raids?
It has not currently been contemplated, but I mean, it might be in the future.
How do you plan to roll out the new training as far as to dealing with the children? Is it going to be something that, well, a couple of questions, right? Because you worked on search warrants. You trained people too on search warrants?
Correct.
Okay. Is there going to be any new additional training at the academy on search warrants and raids?
For the new recruits, that's going to be another phase that's going to be rolling out for new recruits. Right now, we're identifying the people. We want to get the immediate training to the people that do the most search warrants. So we initially ran a query of who was affianced 2 or more times in the last 18 months. And we're starting with those individuals who are authoring these search warrants to ensure they get the training. And that should be done by the end of next month. And then we're going to begin training anybody who's been on a search warrant, which in the last 18 months, which those numbers are around 3,500.
Could we go to one of those training events? Is that something that we could send a camera to see how what happens in the training?
I don't make those decisions, Dave.
Okay. When you talk about this new training, is this part of the Peter Mendez Act, the new law that was passed about training for children in traumatic situations? It went into effect. I don't know when it's rolling out, but it was an act that was passed, signed by the governor last summer. Do you know about that?
I'm aware of the act. This new training was not because of that,
Okay.
the Peter Mendez Act.
Do you know when that training is going to be implemented from the Peter Mendez Act?
I believe that all of that's being handled by a different team, so I can't answer that for you.
You don't know anything about that either?
Not that specific training, but as far as our search warrant training, I've been part of conducting search warrant training for probably about the last 5 years. And the search warrant training has evolved every year as, laws evolve and change and tactics change and society and, social media and new things pop up. So the training has consistently evolved, and this is a topic now that is further evolving the training.
Will there be any kind of a child advocate or somebody to be an advocate for the child on a raid with the team if you do know there's going to be a number of children in the home? Is that something you guys are looking at?
Not currently, no.
Not currently.
But we are working closer with DCFS. I had an officer call me yesterday, a matter of fact, and told me about a search warrant they were in earlier in the week, in which there were 3 toddlers present, and there was an unsecured firearm, and cocaine was out, and marijuana was out, and there was a scale with residue on it, and just where it was accessible to these children. And DCFS was called to investigate, and we want to make sure that these kids get the proper resources, that DCF can come in and properly investigate and make sure that these children aren't living in an unsafe environment. So there are additional steps being taken.
Is there anything being taught about, like, when, let's say you do go into a home and you do encounter children and it's traumatic. Let's just say that it ends up being one of those bad situations that you just end up having the gun out and there's kids in there, whether it's the right place or the wrong place. Is there any discussion in the training about, hey, talk to the kids when before you leave, or this is what you could say, if everything's going to be okay, are there methods that you teach the officers to try to deal with these kids with a little bit more care?
We're all human beings, and a lot of the police officers there have children themselves, and I think we all have empathy as parents, and I mean, I've seen that since day one of doing search warrants, that there's always officers that step up and lend that empathetic ear. And now, obviously, some officers are better at it than others. Yeah. But consistently, I always see officers stepping up and reassuring these children and doing the best we can in chaotic situations. A lot of these children live in extremely chaotic, dangerous situations, and that's why we want to try to get help to them through professionals at DCFS.
What did you feel? You were mentioning it in the beginning When you saw some of the stories, what did you feel for some of these kids?
Like I said, based on the way that the footage was, you felt bad for them. Now, I don't know all the specific details, and I don't want to Monday morning quarterback something that I don't have all the specifics on. I didn't investigate it, but from what I saw is we don't want to see that happen. We don't want to erode the trust with the community. When we do these search warrants, we want to help the community. It's great. We get on a routine basis, we're walking out of a search warrant and neighbors are telling us, thank you, whispering, it's about time. And these bad homes really do big damage to these communities.
And Lieutenant, this is a pending lawsuit. It's still also against the police department in the city. We can't comment on pending litigation involving these cases.
Just kind of in general.
We talk generally about how we've trained in the past, how we're training now, but as far as commenting specifically on these cases,
just ask.
We can't discuss those.
All right, Michelle just has a.
Okay. And also, there's arbitration going on right now too, as far as disciplining officers for their body cams. So we can't discuss that either.
Oh, that's actually
that's between the FOP and an arbitrator, and they're determining whether or not.
But isn't there?
Whether or not officers should be disciplined.
Is there a log being created though for?
Okay. So, do you want me to?
No, is there a log being created if? For the occasion, are you also creating any kind of a log to track when an officer doesn't activate their body camera?
Not per policy.
Okay,
so not per this policy.
But does this new policy add discipline for that?
This policy requires that an officer follow the body-worn camera policy. But as stated, there is pending arbitrations and grievances regarding between the FOP and the city regarding body-worn cameras. So I can't answer will discipline happen for failure to use.
So you don't know if discipline will happen, but you put the policy in place.
For sure.
Okay. And now, Michelle, what was your question?
Okay, so my question, and then just look at Dave for the answer, please. But Lieutenant,
I'll rephrase it.
Okay, so I want to go back to in our cases, the officers knew, and some of it was caught on body camera. They got new warrants. They knew they went. They didn't check the address, and they knew that they were at the wrong home. A woman who was naked when they went in. Why not add a log number when they know it? What's the harm in doing that?
This is the issue that I brought up earlier about, you said you were going to track when it's when it's a mistake, but not when the actual warrant is wrong, based on bad information. What would be the harm in tracking those kind of cases?
I'm not familiar with the specific case and the specific information surrounding it.
It's just cases. It's cases in general where the affiant gets the wrong information from an informant and hits the wrong home. Right now, the logging is of homes that are accidental. I'm talking about when the warrant is wrong. The warrant is wrong. It's the wrong place. The person never lived there. The person lives across the street. The person's in prison. What would be the harm in logging those kinds of wrong raids?
The problem with that, Dave, is in a lot of situations, the individual that we're searching for on the search warrant isn't going to be on the gas bill. He's not going to be on the phone bill. A lot of the people that engage in these illegal activities, staying at a relative's house or a girlfriend's house or a boyfriend's house or just crashing at a friend's house, and it's difficult to say if it's really wrong information or if it's bad timing, because the individual, there's not always going to be a written record that person lives in that house.
I'm talking about clear-cut ones, like the guy in prison. He's not there. He's supposed to be selling drugs. And I mean, like, when you have a clear-cut case, shouldn't those be logged?
If there's a clear-cut case that the officers aren't following the current protocol, I think you could see some discipline. If it's a blatant, clear-cut case that policy and procedure was not followed, that's why we have the procedures set in place, that then there would be an independent investigation by Internal Affairs to ascertain what went wrong and did the officers not do what they were supposed to do.
Okay. And then, Samada, do you have a question? Yeah.
I was just wanted to clarify. I want to make sure that I understand the policy, so I want to make sure we're reporting on this accurately. The reason why that's really important and why we have a lot of follow-ups on that is because we've uncovered more than a dozen cases that would not fall under
prison.
Right.
So there's been a pattern.
And so the log number that the lieutenant mentioned, as he mentioned, is something that will generate a complaint register and will immediately go to our internal affairs to investigate discipline for that officer. So in that situation, we immediately know that the officers entered the wrong address. The other situations where there could be bad information from a CI, it could be anything, it requires further investigation. If we come up with something that certainly suggests that an officer should be disciplined or a disciplinary investigation should occur, then those will also be sent to our internal affairs. But we won't, in the immediacy after the search warrant, this log number is generated immediately.
But so just so I understand, the log number that's generated, these types of cases that we're talking about, they're not going to be in that log. They would go elsewhere. They would go to internal affairs. They would go to I don't know, COPA, right? Is that what you're saying? They would just be treated like some other kind of misconduct.
Per the current policy, per the new policy, immediately. And so that's not to suggest that if misconduct is discovered once we do a thorough investigation in the post-execution and debriefing after the search warrant was executed, and we find something that should also generate discipline, then it would also be sent off. So we're not suggesting that won't happen. The policy is just set up to, if we immediately know these officers entered the wrong address per the warrant, a log number, there's no option. Log number immediately entered, going to be sent off for disciplinary investigation. The other situations, there might not be officer misconduct in the other situations. So we have to do a thorough check there, a thorough debriefing to decide what should happen.
So Dave, I just want to be clear in that. Any citizen that feels like we did a bad search warrant on them, however they come to that conclusion, they're entitled to make a complaint, and that complaint will be investigated. So we just want to make it clear that any of these complaints, any citizen that feels like that we did a bad search warrant, they can make a complaint. It's going to be investigated, and during that investigation, if that investigation reveals that the officers didn't do their job, there will be a form of discipline.
And then one little strategic thing isn't really a question. It's, are you reporting to? You're separate from the risk manager at City Hall, correct?
Correct.
So this isn't the same. Is this a product of the mayor saying we're going to put a risk manager to go in there and investigate all this? Are you the person that she's talking about at the news conference?
No, there's a chief risk officer for the city of Chicago.
So there's a separate investigation or an audit going on by that person?
No. So she and I have worked together collaboratively in this particular project.
So, but you said it was a coincidence that you looked into search warrants when the mayor clearly said, as a result, during one of her news conferences about our investigations, that she had it. We can't have this.
I said it was a coincidence that these news stories existed. The project, it's a liability management meeting that we have. We sat down and we talked about what are the issues that are pressing with the CPD, where is our risk, and in that meeting, which was in the mayor's office, search warrants it was one of the ones on the list.
Okay.
Well,
thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.